The plasma hurricane had teeth, and it was using every one of them to chew Captain James Riley's shuttle into confetti. He watched his instrument panel transform from reassuring green lights to a Christmas display of red warnings, then to the sort of sparking electronic death that made him wonder if his insurance covered acts of alien weather. "Well," he muttered, wrestling with controls that responded about as well as a drunk elephant, "this is definitely going in my worst vacation ever file." The electromagnetic pulse that followed hit like a sledgehammer made of pure static. Every piece of tech on his reconnaissance shuttle decided to take a simultaneous coffee break, leaving him with all the navigational capability of a particularly optimistic brick. Through the viewports, Kepler 442b spun lazily beneath him, its crimson atmosphere swirling in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't about to become his grave marker. The crash landing was less landing and more controlled falling with style. Riley managed to keep most of his shuttle in one piece, which was either a testament to Terran engineering or dumb luck. He suspected the latter, especially when he crawled out of the wreckage to find that his emergency beacon was broadcasting nothing but what sounded like elevator music mixed with dying whale songs. "At least the planet's got atmosphere," he said to nobody in particular, checking his readings. "Breathable, even, though I'm getting some weird electromagnetic signatures that are probably why my gear's speaking in tongues." That's when he heard the footsteps. Riley had survived 3 years of deep space patrol by trusting his instincts, and right now they were screaming that he was being watched. He palmed his sidearm and tried to look casual while scanning the twisted landscape of metallic trees and crystalline outcroppings that surrounded his crash site. "I know you're there," he called out. "And before you decide to introduce yourself with violence, I should mention that I'm having a really bad day. My shuttle's scrap metal, my coffee maker's broken, and I'm stranded on a planet that apparently thinks weather should involve actual plasma. So maybe we could skip the whole mysterious stalking thing and just talk like civilized beings." The silence stretched long enough for him to wonder if he was talking to himself, which wouldn't have been the strangest thing that happened to him this week. Then she stepped out from behind a cluster of crystal formations, and Riley's first thought was that someone had taken a human woman and decided to improve on the design. She looked perfectly human except for the ears. They were elongated, pointed, and currently twitching in a way that suggested she was listening to frequencies he couldn't detect. Her hair was long and silver-streaked despite her apparent youth, and she moved with the kind of fluid grace that made Riley suddenly conscious of how clunky he felt in his military gear. "Terran Defense Corps," she said, and her voice had an odd musical quality that made his translator implant work overtime. "I should have expected." "Guilty as charged," Riley replied, keeping his hands visible but ready. "Though right now I'm more Terran Crash Victim Corps. You local." Her ears twitched again, and he caught what might have been amusement in her expression. "Local enough. Zephyrian Expeditionary Survey. I was tracking the same energy signature that brought your vessel down." "Well, there's some good news finally," Riley said. "We're both victims of whatever that thing was. I'm James Riley, by the way. My friends call me Riley. My enemies call me various things I probably shouldn't repeat in polite company, and my mother calls me Disappointment. But that's a whole other story." This time he was sure she was fighting a smile. "Lyrelay of the Northern Houses. And before you ask, yes, those ears are natural, and no, I cannot actually hear your thoughts, though your facial expressions are remarkably communicative." That's either a compliment or an insult, and I'm too tired to figure out which. Riley holstered his weapon. "So, Lyrelay of the Northern Houses, please tell me you've got some kind of functioning communication equipment, because mine's currently performing an electronic version of interpretive dance." "I'm afraid my equipment suffered similar difficulties." She gestured toward her own gear, which Riley now noticed was sparking intermittently. "Whatever generated that electromagnetic pulse appears to have been quite thorough." "Fantastic." So we're both stranded on planet unfriendly with no way to call for help. Riley surveyed the desolate landscape. This is the part where one of us suggests we work together for mutual survival, and the other one points out all the reasons that's a terrible idea, right? The thought had occurred to me, Lyreley admitted. Our species have not exactly had smooth relations. True, but I figure getting killed by alien weather is probably an equal opportunity employer. Riley kicked a piece of his shuttle's hull. Besides, you seem reasonable for someone who was stalking me through crystal formations. That's got to count for something. Lyreley's ears flattened slightly. I was not stalking. I was conducting reconnaissance. Right, and I wasn't crashing. I was conducting an emergency landing evaluation. Riley grinned. Look, we can stand here and argue about terminology while the planet tries to kill us, or we can pool our resources and maybe live long enough to argue about more important things later. Like whether your people's coffee is actually coffee, or some kind of elaborate prank. We do not consume what you call coffee, Lyreley said solemnly. Riley stared at her for a long moment. Okay, now I'm questioning this whole alliance thing. This time she definitely smiled, and Riley realized that, for the first time since his shuttle started falling apart, he wasn't entirely focused on how screwed he was. Lyreley had an interesting smile, the kind that suggested there was a lot more going on behind those unusual ears than she was letting on. Perhaps, she said, we should focus on immediate survival concerns before addressing the coffee situation. Fair point, Riley conceded. Though I reserve the right to bring it up again later, it's going to be a long stay and a man needs his priorities. The wind picked up around them, carrying the metallic taste of the planet's electromagnetic field and the distant rumble of another storm building on the horizon. Riley looked at Lyreley, noting the way her ears swiveled toward the sound like organic radar dishes. So, he said, any chance you know how to build a shelter that won't attract lightning made of actual plasma? Some chance, she replied, though it will require cooperation. Well, Riley said, shouldering his emergency pack, good thing I'm feeling cooperative. Fair warning, though, I make terrible jokes when I'm stressed, and I have a feeling I'm going to be very stressed for the foreseeable future. Lyreley's ears twitched again, and Riley was starting to recognize it as her version of suppressed amusement. I will endeavor to survive both the planet and your humor, Captain Riley. Just Riley's fine. We're probably going to be seeing a lot of each other. As they began walking toward what looked like a more sheltered area among the crystal formations, Riley couldn't help but think that being stranded on a hostile alien world with a mysterious woman from a species humanity barely understood was either going to be the best adventure of his life or the most complicated way to die he'd ever encountered. Possibly both. 3 weeks on Kepler 442b had taught Riley that the planet had a twisted sense of humor. Just when you thought you'd figured out its patterns, it would throw something new at you. Like yesterday's incident with what he dubbed the electric space badgers. They are not badgers, Lyreley said for the 15th time, carefully weaving biofabric into their shelter's framework. They are voltaic scavengers, and they're actually quite intelligent. Intelligent enough to chew through our power coupling while making adorable chittering noises, Riley replied, sealing another gap in their makeshift home with salvaged polymer paste. I stand by my classification system. If it's fuzzy, destructive, and makes me want to simultaneously pet it and run away screaming, it's a space badger. The shelter itself was a masterpiece of interspecies cooperation and creative engineering. Riley's shuttle debris formed the skeleton, while Lyreley's biofabric provided weatherproofing that actually responded to her bioelectric field. The result looked like what might happen if a military engineer and an organic architect had a friendly argument and decided to build something together. Your classification system lacks scientific rigor, Lyreley observed, though her ears betrayed her amusement. My classification system keeps me sane, Riley countered, checking the atmospheric processor he'd cobbled together from life support components. Speaking of which, I've been meaning to ask about those ears of yours. Do they come with enhanced hearing, or are they just aesthetically superior to boring old human ears? Lyra Lay's ears flattened slightly, which Riley had learned meant she was either embarrassed or annoyed, sometimes both. They are more sensitive to electromagnetic fluctuations. It helps with navigation and detecting weather patterns. That's incredibly useful. Also explains why you keep twitching them when storms are coming. Riley grinned. I've been using you as a living weather station for weeks. I had noticed your increased attentiveness to my ear movements. Is that weird? That feels like it might be weird. Different species, different etiquette rules. For all I know, commenting on someone's ears is like asking about their tax returns or something equally personal. Lyra Lay made a sound that might have been a laugh. Riley had been collecting these small victories in humor like a linguistic anthropologist. Zephyrian amusement, he'd discovered, was subtle but genuine when you earned it. Among my people, ears are considered quite ordinary, she said, though we do appreciate when others notice their functionality rather than just their appearance. Good to know I'm being functionally inappropriate rather than aesthetically inappropriate. Riley sealed the last gap and stepped back to admire their work. You know, if we ever get off this rock, we should patent this design. Emergency shelters that actually respond to their occupants. We'd make a fortune. Assuming either of our governments would allow such cooperation, Lyra Lay pointed out. Riley's expression sobered slightly. The reminder of the broader political tensions between their species always hit like cold water. Out here, survival made everything simple. Back in civilization, things got complicated quickly. Yeah, well, he said, forcing the lightness back into his voice, maybe we don't mention the part where we learned to work together. Just say we reverse-engineered each other's technology through aggressive scientific observation. Is that what we're calling it? Aggressive scientific observation sounds much more official than figured it out while trying not to die. Plus, it makes us sound competent instead of desperate. Their daily routine had evolved into something surprisingly comfortable. Mornings meant checking the shelter's integrity and scanning for weather patterns using Lyra Lay's electromagnetic sensitivity and Riley's improvised instruments. Afternoons were for foraging, during which Riley had discovered that Zephyrian bioscanners could identify edible local vegetation, while his military survival training could spot the things likely to eat them back. The fruit clusters near the eastern ridge are ripening, Lyra Lay reported, consulting readings from her handheld scanner, though I detect elevated alkaloid levels. Translation: they'll either be delicious or they'll make us see colors that don't exist, Riley said. I love alien botany. It's like grocery shopping crossed with Russian roulette. Your species has a remarkable tolerance for uncertainty. Our species has a remarkable talent for making bad decisions and calling them adventures. Riley shouldered his makeshift collection bag. Besides, you've got that scanner, and I've got my time-tested strategy of try a tiny bit and see what happens. Between science and stupidity, we'll figure it out. The foraging expedition proved profitable, yielding not just the questionable fruit, but also a new discovery: crystalline formations that seemed to amplify electromagnetic signals. Riley had stumbled across them literally, tripping over what looked like ordinary rocks only to watch them pulse with soft light when he made contact. Interesting, Lyra Lay murmured, kneeling beside the crystals and extending her scanner. They appear to be resonating with local electromagnetic patterns. If we could harness this properly, we could boost our communication range, Riley finished, his engineering mind already spinning possibilities. Maybe even punch through whatever's jamming our emergency beacons. The theory is sound. The execution, however, would require considerable modification of our existing equipment. Riley looked at their pile of salvaged components, Zephyrian biotech, and jury-rigged solutions. Lucky for us, I've gotten pretty good at making things work that have no business working. And you've got the patience to deal with my trial-and-error approach to xenotechnology. Your approach lacks elegance, but it is surprisingly effective. I'm going to take that as a compliment. You should. That evening, as they worked on integrating the crystal amplifiers into their communication array, Riley realized he'd stopped thinking of Lyreley as the alien. Somewhere between shared meals of processed rations and foraged supplements, late-night watches trading stories about their respective worlds, and collaborative problem-solving sessions that involved a lot of creative swearing in two languages, she'd just become Lyreley. You know, he said, carefully adjusting a frequency modulator. 3 weeks ago, if someone had told me I'd be building communication equipment with a Zephyrian engineer while stranded on a planet that has weather made of plasma, I'd have suggested they cut back on the synthetic stimulants. 3 weeks ago, if someone had told me I would find human humor both baffling and oddly comforting, I would have questioned their mental stability, Lyreley replied, her own hand steady as she calibrated biocircuits to interface with human technology. Oddly comforting, I'm upgrading that to a definite compliment. Your optimism in the face of increasingly unlikely survival odds is admirable. Riley paused in his work to look at her. In the soft glow of their improvised lighting, with her silver-streaked hair catching the light and her ears focused intently on some frequency he couldn't hear, she looked both completely alien and utterly familiar. You know what I think? He said, I think we're going to be fine. Maybe not rescued tomorrow fine, but fine. We've got shelter, food sources, and we're getting better at predicting the weather. Plus, we make a good team. Lyreley's ears swiveled toward him, and for a moment her expression was unreadable. A good team, she repeated softly. The best. You handle the science, I handle the creative problem-solving, and together we've managed to not die for 3 weeks running. That's got to be some kind of record for interspecies cooperation under duress. Indeed, she said, and there was something in her voice that Riley couldn't quite identify. A record of sorts. Outside their shelter, the electromagnetic winds of Kepler 4, he felt home. The first sign something was wrong came at dawn on their 32nd day, when Lyreley stumbled getting out of her sleeping area and nearly walked into the shelter's support beam. Whoa there, Riley said, catching her elbow. You okay? That beam's been in the same place for weeks. Did it personally offend you somehow? Lyreley blinked slowly, as if trying to focus on something just out of reach. I apologize. I seem to be experiencing some spatial disorientation. Spatial disorientation sounds like fancy talk for everything spinning and I don't like it, Riley observed, noting the slight tremor in her hands. When did this start? Yesterday evening, though I attributed it to fatigue. She pressed a hand to her temple, and Riley noticed her ears were flattened against her head. It appears to be worsening. Riley's field medic training kicked in automatically. He'd seen enough radiation sickness and environmental exposure to recognize the signs, though he'd never dealt with Zephyrian physiology before. Scale of 1 to 10, how bad is the disorientation? And please don't give me that stoic alien dignity thing, where you pretend everything's fine while you're actually dying. I would not describe it as dying, Lyreley said carefully. Perhaps significant inconvenience. Right, so that's Zephyrian for pretty awful, but I'm too proud to admit it. Riley guided her to their makeshift seating area. Stay put while I run some scans, and before you argue, this isn't a cultural thing or a pride thing. This is a, I need my partner functional or we're both screwed thing. His portable medical scanner wasn't designed for alien physiology, but it could detect basic electromagnetic patterns and cellular activity. What it showed made him frown. Lyreley's bioelectric field, normally a steady hum of organized energy, was fluctuating wildly. Well, here's something interesting and mildly terrifying, Riley said, studying the readings. Your bioelectric signature is doing something that looks like a very confused disco, Any chance this is normal Zephyrian behavior? It is not, Lyreley admitted, and Riley could hear the worry she was trying to hide. Our bioelectric fields are typically quite stable. The fluctuations suggest some form of external interference. Riley looked around their shelter, then at his scanner's environmental readings. External interference. Like, say, a planet that's basically one giant electromagnetic anomaly. The hypothesis has merit. Of course it does. Our shelter's been protecting us from the worst of the M radiation, but you're more sensitive to it than I am. Riley ran a hand through his hair. Your people's superior biology comes with a downside nobody mentioned in the diplomatic briefings. Superior is a subjective assessment, Lyreley said, though she had to steady herself against the shelter wall as another wave of disorientation hit. Right now I'm feeling pretty good about my boring baseline human electromagnetic insensitivity, Riley muttered, checking his medical supplies. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to treat this like radiation exposure and environmental sensitivity, because that's probably what it is. You're going to let me, because arguing with the medic is stupid and you're too smart for stupid. But I am capable of managing my own medical needs, Lyreley protested weakly. I'm sure you are, under normal circumstances, but right now your managing consists of walking into stationary objects and pretending it's not happening. Riley began pulling items from his medical kit. Besides, we're partners. Partners take care of each other. It's in the unwritten contract of not dying alone on hostile planets. The next several hours tested both their patience and their improvised medical resources. Riley's anti-radiation medications weren't designed for Zephyrian metabolism, so he had to calculate dosages based on body weight and hope for the best. Meanwhile, Lyreley's condition worsened, the electromagnetic sensitivity manifesting in severe headaches and episodes where she lost track of which direction was up. "This is humiliating," she said during one of her clearer moments, as Riley helped her sip water mixed with electrolyte supplements. "This is biology," Riley corrected. "Biology doesn't care about dignity. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way during my first deep space deployment. Nothing humbles you quite like zero-G nausea in front of your entire squad. You are attempting to make me feel better through shared embarrassment. Is it working?" Lyreley's ears twitched slightly, perhaps marginally. "I'll take marginal improvement. It's better than my usual success rate with comedy." Riley checked her pulse, noting that her bioelectric field seemed to be stabilizing slightly. "You know, for someone whose people pride themselves on self-reliance, you're being remarkably cooperative about accepting help. The alternative appears to be incapacitation or worse," Lyreley pointed out. "Even Zephyrian pride has its practical limits." "Good to know. I was starting to wonder if I'd have to stage some kind of medical intervention." The worst episode came that evening, when Lyreley's spatial disorientation became so severe she couldn't maintain her balance. Riley found her gripping their communication console, eyes squeezed shut and breathing carefully controlled. "Okay, that's it," he said, moving to her side. "You're going to rest whether you like it or not, and I'm going to play nursemaid. No arguments. I do not require." "Lyreley," Riley's voice was gentle but firm. "Let me help. Please." Something in his tone must have reached her, because she allowed him to guide her to her sleeping area without further protest. As he helped her settle onto the biofabric bedding that adjusted to her body temperature and bioelectric field, Riley realized this was the first time he'd seen her truly vulnerable. "This is not how I intended our partnership to develop," she said quietly, and there was something almost fragile in her voice that made Riley's chest tighten. "Yeah, well, partnerships rarely go according to plan," he replied, adjusting their shelter's lighting to a softer setting that wouldn't aggravate her headaches. "I mean, I figured we'd spend most of our time arguing about proper scientific methodology, and whether my jokes count as psychological warfare." "Your jokes do not count as psychological warfare," Lyreley said. though they do represent a unique form of cultural exchange. I'm going to put unique form of cultural exchange on my resume under special skills. Riley settled into a chair he'd positioned nearby, close enough to help if needed but far enough to give her space. For now, just rest. I've got the watch covered. You cannot maintain constant vigilance indefinitely. I can maintain it long enough for you to recover. That's what partners do. In the soft glow of their improvised lighting, with the electromagnetic winds of Kepler 442 be humming their nightly chorus outside, Riley watched over his alien partner and realized that somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just about survival. Lyreley wasn't just his ally anymore, or even his friend. She was someone he cared about, someone whose well-being mattered to him in ways that had nothing to do with practical partnership and everything to do with the fact that she was brilliant and funny and brave, and she was hurting. Lyreley's voice was soft, already drowsy from the medication. Yeah. Thank you. Don't mention it, he said, settling in for what he suspected would be a long night of monitoring her condition. Just get better, okay? This place is a lot less interesting when you're not around to correct my scientific terminology. Her ears twitched once in what he'd learned to recognize as amusement, and then she slept. Riley maintained his watch, checking her bioelectric readings periodically and adjusting their shelter's shielding to provide maximum protection from the planet's electromagnetic interference. Outside, another storm was building, but inside their shared shelter, he felt oddly peaceful despite the circumstances. They'd weathered worse together, and they'd weather this too. After all, they made a good team. Recovery, Riley had learned, was a gradual thing that didn't follow convenient schedules. Lyreley's strength returned in increments over the following weeks, her bioelectric field stabilizing as their improved shelter shielding reduced her exposure to Kepler 442b's electromagnetic interference. But the experience had changed something fundamental between them, creating a new intimacy that neither quite knew how to navigate. Your morning scans show complete normalization, Riley announced, reviewing the medical scanner's readings. Congratulations, you're officially back to being biologically superior to baseline humans. I was never biologically superior, Lyreley replied, though her ears betrayed her amusement. Merely differently adapted. Right, and I'm merely differently talented at crash landing on hostile planets. Riley grinned as he packed away the medical equipment. Face it, we're both perfectly designed for our respective disasters. Their daily routines had evolved again, shaped by the period of vulnerability and care that had stripped away the last formal barriers between them. Lyreley no longer maintained the careful emotional distance her diplomatic training had instilled, while Riley found himself more attuned to her subtle expressions and the language of her ears than he'd ever been to another person's moods. The fruit clusters near the southern formation are ready for harvest, Lyreley reported, consulting her bioscanner, and I've detected no hostile wildlife in that sector today. Good, because I'm not in the mood to negotiate with any more electric space badgers, Riley said, shouldering his collection pack. Though I have to admit, they're growing on me. Yesterday, I caught myself saving them some of our ration scraps. You are developing an inappropriate attachment to the local fauna. Hey, they've got personality. Plus, they make those little chittering sounds when they're happy. It's adorable in a might accidentally electrocute me kind of way. The foraging expedition proved routine, their teamwork now so seamless that they moved through the crystalline landscape with the efficiency of a long-established partnership. Riley handled navigation and threat assessment, while Lyreley managed biological analysis and environmental monitoring. They communicated in a mixture of words, gestures, and shared understanding that would have fascinated xenolinguists. The weather patterns have been unusually stable recently, Lyreley observed, as they made their way back to shelter with their harvest. No major electromagnetic storms for nearly a week. Don't jinx it, Riley warned. This planet's probably listening, and it has a twisted sense of timing. That evening, as they settled into their usual quiet routine, Riley noticed that Lyraleigh's hair had become tangled during her recovery period. The silver-streaked strands, normally kept neat and practical, were knotted from restless sleep and the confinement of illness. She'd made a few attempts to manage it herself, but her still-recovering coordination made the task frustrating. "You know," Riley said, watching her struggle with a particularly stubborn snarl, "I could help with that." Lyraleigh's hands stilled, and her ears swiveled toward him with sharp attention. "Help with what?" "Your hair. It's gotten pretty tangled, and you're fighting a losing battle trying to fix it one-handed." Riley gestured to his improvised comb, fashioned from salvaged materials weeks ago. "I've got steady hands and plenty of patience. Basic maintenance, nothing fancy." The silence that followed stretched long enough for Riley to wonder if he'd somehow crossed an invisible cultural boundary. Lyraleigh's expression was unreadable, her ears flattened in what might have been consideration or concern. "Among your people," she said carefully, "hair grooming is a casual activity." "Pretty much. Friends, family, partners, we help each other out when needed. It's just practical." Riley shrugged. "Though if it's weird for Zephyrians, no problem. I just thought you might appreciate the help." Another long pause, then Lyraleigh nodded slowly. "I would appreciate the assistance." They arranged themselves comfortably near their heating unit, Lyraleigh settling cross-legged while Riley positioned himself behind her. The improvised comb was crude but functional, and Riley worked with the methodical patience of someone accustomed to delicate technical work. "This is nice," he said after a few minutes of comfortable silence. "Peaceful. We should have scheduled relaxation periods weeks ago." "Scheduled relaxation seems contradictory," Lyraleigh replied softly. "Everything's contradictory when you think about it too hard. Especially interspecies partnerships on planets that shouldn't be habitable but somehow are." Riley worked through a particularly stubborn knot with gentle persistence. "You know, when I first crashed here, I figured I had maybe a week before this place killed me. Now I'm sitting here thinking, we've actually built something pretty remarkable." "Remarkable in what way?" "Partnership that works across species lines, shared space that feels like home, communication that goes deeper than language." Riley's movements were rhythmic and soothing as he worked through her hair section by section. "Most humans never get to experience anything like this. Most Zephyrians probably don't either." "No," Lyraleigh agreed quietly. "They do not." The simple intimacy of the moment felt natural, comfortable in a way that surprised Riley. Lyraleigh's hair was softer than it looked, and there was something meditative about the careful process of restoring order to the tangled strands. Neither of them spoke much, content with the quiet sounds of his gentle work and the ever-present electromagnetic hum of their adopted world. Riley was nearly finished, working through the last few small knots at the ends of her hair, when Lyraleigh suddenly went rigid beneath his hands. Her sharp intake of breath cut through the comfortable silence like a blade, and when she turned to look at him, her eyes were wide with something between shock and wonder. "You do realize what that means, don't you?" she whispered. Riley's hands stilled in her hair, confusion replacing contentment. What means? I was just helping with some tangles." "In Zephyrian culture," Lyraleigh's voice was barely audible, "hair grooming is not casual. It is an intimate act, reserved only for family bonds and life partnerships." The words hit Riley like a physical blow, realization dawning with uncomfortable clarity. "Life partnerships," he repeated slowly. "Among my people, to allow another to tend one's hair is to invite the deepest form of emotional and spiritual connection. It is how we declare our intent to bond permanently with another." Riley stared at her, his improvised comb forgotten in his suddenly nerveless fingers. "And you just performed the ritual unknowingly." And Lyraleigh's ears were flat against her head, her expression a mixture of mortification and something else Riley couldn't identify. "I allowed it knowing what it meant." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither had anticipated. Riley's mind raced through the past hour, recontextualizing every moment, every gentle touch, every comfortable word. What had felt like simple kindness had been, from Lyralay's perspective, something far more significant. "So," Riley said finally, his voice carefully light despite the thunder of his heartbeat, "hypothetically speaking, if someone were to have accidentally proposed according to Zephyrian custom, and if someone else were to have accidentally accepted, where would that leave us?" Lyralay's ears twitched, and for a moment her expression brightened with something that might have been hope. "Hypothetically. Completely hypothetically," Riley confirmed, though his hands moved almost without conscious thought to gently resume combing through her hair. "Because it would be a shame to leave the job half-finished, regardless of cultural implications." This time when she smiled, it was radiant and unguarded and completely transformative. "Hypothetically, it would leave us exactly where we are now, partners who have found something neither expected but both value." "I can live with that kind of hypothetical situation," Riley said softly, and as he continued his gentle ministrations, he realized that somewhere between crashing on this impossible planet and learning to care for someone from another world, he discovered something more valuable than rescue. He'd found home,